Well, welcome. Good morning. Glad you guys are here. Today we're going to continue in our relationship series, Friends and Benefits. And this week, before we dive in, I want to just kind of quickly recap some of our high points from last week. And so last week we kind of determined that in order for us to have successful marriages, that we needed to continue intentionally growing in relationship with our spouses. And we said that the only way we could really do that is if we are actually growing in our friendship with Jesus. And so the only way that we can actually grow in friendship with our spouse is if we are in relationship and we're growing in friendship with Jesus, because He allows things to flow out of us, right? We don't have the ability to love people. We don't have the ability to be proper friends, to do the things that we are called to do if we don't start with a relationship with Christ. It's that vertical relationship that allows us to have success in our horizontal relationships with our friends, with our family, and those of us who are married, those of you who desire to be married. As you're thinking about that relationship, think about the friendship relationship. That's the part that's going to stick around. And as we talk about this, and we really do, we want to make sure that we have that relationship with Jesus in the right place, because the way it should flow is Jesus should be first on our list of relationships to have, right? Jesus, and then it's your spouse, and then it's your family. And those of you who don't have spouses yet, then you just skip the spouse part and you just go right to your family. So it's your family relationships, and then fourth, it is your relationships with everyone else. And so as long as we have Jesus at the top of that, as long as we have Him as where we're locking our eyes and kind of focused on that, and we have that right relationship with Him that's growing, then it's going to allow us to have right relationships and growing relationships with everyone else around us. And so, but that's where we kind of started last week, is that in order for us to maintain a proper marriage, to have a strong marriage, then we have to have intentionality about growing our friendship with our spouses. And we kind of dug in to some of that stuff in our discussions last week, and I gave you the acronym for friends, and the fruit-filled. So we want our marriages to be filled with fruit of the Spirit. So Galatians 5:22, with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And when we're doing this, when we have fruitful and we have fruit-filled marriages, it brings honor to God and it honors our spouse, right? When we're loving our spouse, when we're engaging in joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness, and we're being faithful to them, and we're being gentle with them, and we're being self-controlled with them, it honors them. And through all of that, we are honoring God by our relationship there. We also said it needs to be reciprocal. To get a friend, you got to be a friend, right? And so you want to make sure that you're being friendly. It's hard to have a growing friendship if you're not being friendly with your spouse. If you're not being friendly with those around you, then it's difficult to have a friend. And when you recognize someone as being friendly with you, when they're trying to engage in a friend relationship with you, reciprocate that. Go back and be a friend to them. Extend that same friendship. Extend that same courtesy to them. Intimacy. We said into me, see, right? So we want this to be the intimacy element of this is just being transparent and having genuine conversations, right? We talked about how, we talked about facts. We start talking about, hey, this is really what happened today. Then we got into the opinions. Well, what's your judgment on that? What's your ruling on that? Then we get into feelings. So how do you actually really feel about what went down? How do you feel about that transaction? How do you feel about what happened at work today? And when we get into that and we're having those transparent conversations and we're communicating with each other, it really drives that friendship a lot deeper and a lot more intimate. Enjoyable, have fun together. We read Ecclesiastes 9:7-9, where it talks about living life together, right? Enjoy breaking bread together. Enjoy your wine together. We can discuss the wine part later, but having a good time together, enjoying each other's company, going out and engaging in life together. Not just being hermits and locking yourself away, but actually enjoying life. We also talked about how it's needed. Isolation is a bad thing, And we even see in Genesis 2:18 where God says it's not good for man to be alone. It's not good to be alone. It's needed. Our friendships are needed, whether it's a marital relationship or whether it is just platonic relationships that we have outside of our homes. We need friendships. We need these relationships because it's not good for us to be isolated. When we're isolated, then we're sitting on an island and we're just a prime target for Satan to come and attack us. And he starts messing with us, and it's not good for us. And so we know that friends are needed, devoted. When it comes to your marriage relationship, have eyes and a heart for only your spouse. Proverbs 4:23 says, guard your heart. And we kind of talked about not just guarding your heart, but guarding your eyes. Guard what goes in your head. Go guard your eyes and your ears and make sure that the things that you're seeing, the things that you're hearing, are actually filling you up and not tearing you down. We also talked about, avoiding that emotional adultery. Like, it's not just having a sexual relationship that can tear things down. It's about having an emotional relationship with someone who's not your spouse. If you're in a dedicated relationship, don't go look for emotional comfort from someone else. You need to have a devoted emotional life with your spouse. And then sanctify. We kind of pointed out Gary Chapman's point that marriage is here to help us become holy. And who else sees all of your mess, right? Who else sees your breakdown? Who else sees the sin in your life, the things that maybe we kind of put a mask over before we step outside into the public? Who sees that? Our spouse. And so marriage, God uses marriage to reveal sin to us and allow us the opportunity to confess and repent and then seek forgiveness. And when we do those things, it leads us to holiness, which then leads to happiness and contentment. And so this engaging into a deeper friendship, to be friends with your spouse, does a lot for us. And so we looked at all this stuff last week, and if you want to go back and kind of review some of those notes, those are available on the website. But we looked at this stuff, and we realized that we have to be intentional. We have to set out with a purpose of going deeper in friendship with our spouses, because life just kind of gets crazy, right? And so today, one of the things, this week's topic, the thing we're going to talk about today is commitment. How do we commit? How do we commit? How do we stick to all of this stuff? In order for us to experience success in marriage, and really in all relationships, we must be committed. We have to be all in, which is why I'm wearing my Clemson jacket today, because we're all in, baby.
Hey.
All right? All right? We're all in for relationships. The problem in our world, the issue in our culture today, is that we view marriage in a not all-in way, right? Last week we kind of talked about that comic strip where the guy was talking about how he was approaching his marriage, and he was like, man, I'm really getting nervous now that I'm engaged. And the guy was like, I understand, 7 to 8 years of commitment is a long time, right? Because that's how our culture views marriage. It's not an all-in. It's not a in it to the end type of commitment. And so what we need to recognize is that our culture says, I'm in as long as I win. As long as I'm winning, I'm happy to stick it out. As long as I'm gaining in this relationship, as long as it's easy and I get all the upside, then I'm in. Culture says to stay committed until something goes wrong, stick in until things get stuck, right? I'm willing to stick in this thing until we're stuck in a rut. It's just boring. It's not fun anymore. Go back to the enjoy life together, right? Mix things up a little bit. Engage in activity together. I'm in it. I'm going to stick in until I get stuck. I'm going to hang on until it's too hard. When it gets hard, I'm out. I'm willing to hang on until it's too hard. We've made marriage a transactional relationship. And as long as I'm getting everything that you agreed to give me, I'm in. I'm committed, right? As long as she's giving me everything I need, as long as I'm not having to put too much out, as long as I'm being filled up, I'm committed to it. But the minute you let me down, the minute I feel like you're not actually in it for me, then I'm out. the minute I feel like this isn't what we agreed to, I'm out. So what does all this stuff sound like? It sounds like a contract, right? If you will do these things, then I will stay married to you. I will love you, I will commit to you as long as you make me feel good. As long as you're nice every second of the day. You can't have a bad day, right? Because if you have a bad day, then I'm out. What kind of relationship is that? As long as I can spend money on whatever I want to, as long as you do what I say to do. As long as you listen to me. You see, we quickly and we completely forget about those vows in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad times, for richer or poorer, till death do us part. We forget that stuff. It all just kind of goes out the window. Because that really wasn't part of the contract that we were working on. We've turned marriage into a contractual relationship. We've committed long enough to get the contract in place, and then whether we keep the contract in place depends on whether or not I remain happy. It's one thing for us to say, that's how the world treats marriage. That's a broken cultural view, right? They have these prenuptial agreements to protect themselves. They feel the chemistry of a relationship and drop a contract for marriage, but they fail to grow the friendship, and they skip the friends part, and they just go right to the benefits part, right? They skip the friends phase. They skip the most important relationship. They skip that part of it. But it's not just the worldview. It's not just the cultural view. Evangelicals have a similar view based on what we're seeing in real life activity, right? We're seeing that Christians are getting divorced. And a lot of it is because of that reason of, I'm just not happy with him or her anymore. They just don't do it for me. My commitment's gone because they're not committed to me. They're not doing everything that they agreed to do to make me happy. They're not holding up their end of this arrangement. They're just hard to live with. I hear statements in counseling, well, before we were married, she did this, or he did these things to make me feel special. But while we were dating, I was treated differently. This is not what I signed up for. Now, I hope we recognize that contracts can be negotiated, right? You bargain and you talk through what you're willing to give in exchange for what you're willing to get. And always, right? Like always, 100% of the time, when you're negotiating a contract, when you're trying to get a deal done, you're always looking to get more than you give. You're always negotiating the deal to get the upside of everything. You want to give up less than you gain. Nobody ever walks onto a car lot, right? And if you've done this, then let me know, because we need to have a different kind of conversation. But nobody ever walks onto a car lot and goes, you know what, buddy? You're selling that car for $30,000. I'll tell you what, right now, I'll give you $35,000 for it. Just let me sign the papers and I'm out. 35, okay, 36, you're right, 36. When, like what? We don't do that. We don't walk in to a negotiation. We don't try to get into an arrangement where we're like giving up extra stuff. We're always looking for the better deal, right? We're always looking for the most that we can get for the least that we have to give up. If we're looking for what we get out of a relationship, we'll be looking to get out of the relationship. If we walk into marriage, if we walk into friendships, If we walk into any relationship in our lives and we're looking exclusively to get the most out of that relationship, we'll be looking to get out of that relationship. It won't take long. Because as soon as I feel like I've maximized everything I can get out of this relationship, I'm out. Right? If we're looking for the most that we can get out of a relationship, and that's what we're going after, as soon as we hit our full, as soon as it's not working out to my best interest, then we're out. We walk out of that relationship. At some point, the things you get out of the relationship will diminish. You'll have children. They take time and energy. Your spouse is busy. They're worn out from dealing with the kids. The energy you used to get is less than what it used to be. The energy that's left over for you is less. Jobs and careers shift, and time and energy get invested in those things, and it just detracts from the time and energy that goes into the marital friendship and taking this beyond the confines of marriage, but just in your relationships, right? With those guys who you can really kind of count on, with those ladies that you can really count on, right? When life starts happening and things get busy, man, you just start getting pulled apart, right? We have to be intentional at looking for ways to grow in our friendships, to grow in our relationships. And if we're just going into it for what we can get out of a relationship, then we'll be looking to get out of it pretty soon. When we base our marriages on contracts, we tend to pull the contract out and take score of the situation. We start looking at how we're not getting everything out of this relationship that we want. We start looking to get out of the relationship. So when I worked in the music business, I tell this story a lot, so if you've heard it before, I apologize, take a short nap. But when I worked in the music business, we dealt with contracts all the time, right? Contracts all the time. I managed bands. And I was having this meeting with a potential client one time, and I issued them a contract, and we sat down for coffee, and they pulled my contract out, and they pulled two more out from different managers, and they're like, so we don't really see the difference between your contract and these other two, right? So what makes this special? And really kind of what it boils down to is I told them, it's like, that's right, there's not much difference between our contracts. Like, the job is the job, and I'm going to do my job, they're going to do their job, it's just how it is. What the contract is here for is not to tell us how we're going to work together, but it's going to tell us how we're going to break up. When all of this starts falling apart, when I make a decision that you don't like, when you make a decision I don't like, this contract is here to tell us how we're going to part ways. The contract doesn't tell us how we're going to work together, it just tells us how we're going to break up. And so if we think about that in terms of our relationships, if we're walking into every relationship in our lives and we're looking for what we can get out of it, if we're approaching it from a contractual standpoint, from a viewpoint like that, it's not going to tell us how we're going to mesh together. It doesn't tell us how we're going to coexist and grow in relationship. It tells us that eventually we're going to fall apart. And this contract just gives us the ammunition. It tells us how we're going to do it. Contract has an expiration date. Contractual relationships eventually end. In that example I was sharing with you with contracts, at the end of our term, which was usually 3 to 5 years, it had an option to extend 1 year for 3 consecutive years. And if we decided to not extend, then it had some payouts, it had some different things that protected both parties. It was heavier weighted for us as the managers and the representatives of the artists, because that's just how they were drawn up, because it's all about what I'm getting out of the relationship, right? And so when we have these contracts, they had an expiration date. We're agreeing to play nice together until this date. And at which point, we're either going to continue agreeing to play together, or we're going to break up, and then what's left in here in this contract tells us how we're going to do that, how we're going to separate, how we're going to divide up the assets, and how we're going to see who gets the kids on the weekend and who gets the dog and all that fun stuff. It tells us how we're going to break up. The contract doesn't come out when the relationship is in good standing, right? It doesn't come out when there are no problems. The contract shows up when somebody's wrong. When it feels like somebody's been wrong. It's like, wait a minute. You did this and I didn't agree. Well, actually, right here, you agreed that this is how we would handle stuff. And when we do that in our relationships, we break out these contracts and we're like, wait a minute. You said you were going to meet my needs. You said you were going to make me happy. They're not necessarily written contracts, but we approach our relationships so many times like that. What am I going to get out of this? And as long as you're giving me those things, then I'm in it. We have these contracts. We only break the contracts out when we feel like we're not getting what we want. The contracts tell us how we're going to break up. The contracts are going to tell us how to break up. One more quick example to kind of help maybe tie this into to our world here, not just my former life in the entertainment business, but you think about cell phones, right? Everybody has a cell phone, right? Everybody has a cell phone. And if you were around back when cell phones kind of first came on the scene, you remember those contracts, right? It was a 2-year agreement. You had the flip phone, right? You had the... And to text, it was like you got to hit the ABC, okay, and then you got to go, you got to hit like the letter, the number, like 4 times before you get to the O. It's ridiculous. But we had a 2-year agreement, and it never failed. Like as soon as I got like the phone, like 3 months later, like the newest version came out. Right? And here I am in this contract. I'm like, well, crap, I got this contract. I can't go get the cool new phone. I got to keep hitting the 4 to text. It's not fun. This one has better games. It's easier to deal with. Now, if you're like me, when you got into those contracts with the cell phone, you did one of 2 things, right? You either threw it away with all the packaging from the phone that you just purchased, because you're just like, I'll never need that. I know I signed up for 2 years. Or you filed it, and you're like, one day I'm going to need that joker. And then when the time comes, you're ready to break it out and see how you can get out of your contract. And what happened with me, a couple things happened with me. One, I was on the phone, I was on the road, and I had no cell phone service. I'm like, what the heck? You guys say that you have the best coverage in the country, and yet here I am on the interstate and I can't call anybody. This is terrible. So I go in, it's like, look, you said I would get reception. They're like, but the contract. So then, if you remember, like all the competitors started saying, doesn't matter if you got time left on your contract, switch over to us and we'll buy out your contract. Huh, how about that? And so, of course, it came down to the decision of, do I want an iPhone that bad, or do I want to stay with Verizon? Because AT&T let me down on the interstates. Verizon always went through. The iPhone is so cool. This Trio is a brick. Anyway, off point. Contract. We get into these things and it's like, man, it's just not living up to the expectation. They said that we would have this great service, and yet it's not great service. They said this is the latest and greatest device, and then in 6 months, in 3 months, a new device comes out. And we're looking to see how we can manipulate the contract to better serve us, right? As we're kind of looking at all of this stuff, the big challenge for us today is to shift the way that we're thinking about our marriages and move it away from this contractual ideology to To move it away from this idea of what am I getting out of this and am I getting the most out of this, and shift it into an idea of moving from a contract to a covenant, and recognizing that marriage is not a negotiated contract. Marriage is actually a covenant. Marriage is actually a covenant. And we said that a contract is negotiated and it tells us how we're going to break up, right? That's what a contract is. But look at the difference with a covenant. A covenant tells us how we're going to stay together. A covenant tells us how we're going to win. A covenant is the way into the relationship and not a way out. A covenant is actually established for the benefit of the other person. It's based on unconditional promises. It's based on steadfast love. It's permanent and long-suffering commitment. It requires grace and forgiveness. And it's kept intact no matter what's received in return. When we enter into covenant relationships, we're always looking to one-up the other person at being awesome. Right? We're always looking to show love to the other person, no matter what we get in return. Paul says it this way in Philippians chapter 2. He says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look not to his own interests, but rather to the interests of others. Adopt the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus, who existed in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. Instead, he emptied himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity. And when he had come as man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." Covenant marriage changes things. It changes things. When we step into a covenant, we're looking to serve the other person. If we take on this attitude and this mindset of Christ, then we're going in humility. We're going to be a servant. We're going to step into the relationship. Again, whether it's marriage or whether it's a friendship, whether it's a relationship with our family, like we're looking at this with grace and with mercy. We're going in with a different kind of attitude. It's not about me and what I'm getting out of the deal. It's about me and what I'm giving to you in this deal. It takes the focus off of what's best for me and puts it onto what's best for him or her. What fills up his tank? What fills up her tank? What can I do today that will let them know that I care about them? When we're in a covenant relationship, we're thinking about how can I serve the other person. Covenant marriage actually latches on to those vows that we kind of mentioned here earlier. I take you to be my wife or my husband in sickness and in health, in good and bad times, for richer or poorer. Whether you're happy or angry or depressed, I'm here to love you. I'm committed to you. No matter what life throws at us, I'm here for you. I'm here when things are good and when they're bad. When it gets hard, I want to stand with you. And let's lean on each other to get through this trouble. Even when you're drained, I'm here to give myself to you completely, no matter what you do or don't do for me. John Piper said in a message once, he said, "Staying married, therefore, is not about staying in love. It is about keeping covenant. Till death do us part, or as long as we both shall live, is a sacred covenant promise. It's the same kind Jesus made with his bride when he died for her. Therefore, what makes divorce so horrific in God's eyes is not merely that it involves covenant breaking to the spouse, but it involves misrepresenting Christ and his covenant. Christ will never leave his wife, ever. There may be times of painful distance and tragic backsliding on our part, but Christ keeps his covenant forever. And marriage is a display of that. That is the most ultimate thing that we can say about it. So when we think about our marriage relationships, we should think about it in terms of how Jesus entered into this relationship with his bride. Right? What did he do? He left all power and all glory, and he took on human form. And while he was equal with God, he didn't count that as something to be exploited. He wasn't standing around with the disciples going, "Hey guys, don't you know who I am? You need to be serving me." He didn't do that. They were gathered around ready to eat, and he gets up and washes their feet. Repeatedly, he steps in and he serves them. And if we think about it and we approach our relationships the way Jesus approached relationships, in an effort to give away everything that we have, to live serving the people around us, and again, starting with that relationship with Christ, and then having it with your spouse, and then with your family, and then with everybody else around you. If we approach our relationships in that way, we kind of turn everything around, and it's no longer contractual about what I'm getting, it's about covenant and what I'm giving. A covenant marriage is committed to loving your spouse the way Jesus loves us. And again, taking this outside the domain of marriage, but it's being in committed relationships with friends and with family, is always looking at them and saying, you know what? Jesus loves me so much that he died for me. And because I'm in a relationship with you, because we're friends, I need to be looking at how I can better your life. How can I put your needs ahead of my needs? So how do we make this happen? How do we walk into these things? How do we stay committed? How do we make this commitment to the covenant marriage? We just need to focus on living out love for our spouse. To live out love for our spouse. And again, these principles are things that we can take beyond just the marriage relationship. These are things that we can use in our everyday lives. If we're living out love for the people around us, we're looking how to care for them. We're looking at ways to step into life. We're going to see a need and we're going to meet a need. We're looking to be friends with them. We're looking to fill a gap. Again, let's call on Paul to give us some insight here. In 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8, he says, "Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. It's not boastful. It's not arrogant. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not irritable." That can be argued. It's not irritable. Does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes in all things, endures all things. Love never ends. In order for us to shift, to make this commitment from a contractual marriage, from contractual relationships to covenant marriage and covenant relationships, we got to figure out how to live out love. And Paul kind of outlines what love looks like in action. He says love is patient. It's patient. It never pressures the other person. It creates space and margin for the other person. There are things about your friends, about your family, about your spouse that will drive you crazy. Right? We all have our little things that's just like nails on chalkboard, right? But you see, when we have patience It creates margin for the other person. It allows us to have grace. It allows us to kind of overlook those things. And when we put this love into practice, some of those things that kind of aggravate us, some of those things that maybe rub us the wrong way, we actually start looking at, and we recognize our spouse as, wow, that's one of the things that makes him or her unique. It's one of the things that actually is kind of cute. It's one of those things that kind of draws me into who they actually are. It's who they are. Like I know that she does that. I know Heather does this thing. And it's just really cute. And I feel honored that I'm the one who gets to recognize that and see it. Love is patient. It never pressures the other person. It creates space and margin for the other person to be who they are. Love is kind. It's considerate and honoring. Love bears and believes and hopes and endures all things. Life is hard. And see, when we're expressing love to each other, it's being that shoulder to cry on. It's believing. It's believing that there is something better. It's pursuing something better together. It hopes, it endures all things. You can face a whole lot of stuff when you have a strong friendship. You can face a whole lot of stuff when you have a strong relationship with your spouse. Love rejoices with the truth. And I didn't put this on the slides. It's not necessarily in your notes, but I felt like it was worth coming back to. If you start with a lie, you're going to end up with a lie. Right? If you start with a lie, you're going to end up with a lie. Love rejoices with truth. We have to deal in truth with each other. We have to deal in truth with each other. We can't say one thing and then actually live like another thing. I can't say, oh, I love asparagus, and then have my wife cook asparagus and go, why did you cook that? I hate asparagus. Well, you told me a lie, right? With our friends, we can't live with a lie with our friends, right? If we tell a lie to our friends, before too long, they're probably running in the same circles as we are, and it's going to catch back up to us. We're going to be in a relationship that is built on lies. And what Paul's saying here is, love actually rejoices with truth. Love is built out of truth. We have to be honest. We have to be truthful with each other. If we're working on information that is a lie, then everything we're working from is going to be wrong. Right? Everything that we're working towards, everything that we're working for, is the wrong thing, because we're working off of information that's wrong. It's a fallacy. So what happens is when we get ready to give somebody something, or when we're ready to call on them for something, the information we've been given was false. And so all the plans that we've made with that information fall apart. It's been a waste of time. Love doesn't work in lies. Love works in honesty. It rejoices in the truth. It celebrates the truth. Love does not and is not envy. When I don't feel so good about me, you're not going to feel so good about you. I'm envious. I don't feel good about me, so I can't let you feel good about you, so I'm going to tear you down. Right? How does that work in relationship? How does that work in relationship? Well, I'm having a crummy day today, so I want to make your life miserable. That's not what love does. Love is not envious. Love doesn't boast. It doesn't ascribe to this one-upmanship. You think you've got a great story? Let me tell you my great story. It's not boastful. Oh yeah? You got a 98 on that test? I got 100 on that test. You got a cool little raise? I got a bigger raise. You got a new car? Look at the new car I got. Love doesn't function out of boastfulness. Love is not arrogant. It doesn't lack respect. When we're arrogant, we're lacking in respect. We're kind of looking down our noses at people. I think we're better than they are. It's not rude, which is not dishonoring, and it doesn't create regret in the other person because we've dishonored them. Love is not rude. We can be rude. We can be all of these negative things, right? But when we're in covenant relationship with someone, fortunately, we extend grace and we overlook those shortcomings. We overlook those failures. When we're in covenant relationship with someone and we slip up and we make these mistakes, we get the grace. We get the mercy. When we approach our relationships as a covenant viewpoint, you stop looking for the right person and you start being the right person. It shifts the whole thing. You stop looking for the right person and you start being the right person. Are you becoming the person that the person you're married to wants to be married to? Ask your spouse that question. Ask your friends that question. Hey, am I being the kind of friend that you as my friend wants to be friends with? Sometimes the response on that is going to hurt. But if we hear the response, if we're dealing in truth and we're dealing out of love, we're dealing out of a covenant relationship, then it's okay. Because we know we're going to receive a negative message from a place of love and a place of grace and a place of mercy so that we can be sanctified, so that we can recognize our shortcomings, so that we can start working on those things. So we can confess and say, you know what, you're right, I was completely self-involved. I was completely focused on my problem or my issue. And I wasn't even thinking about anybody else.